Imagine standing in a medieval blacksmith's forge. The air is thick with smoke. Sparks fly as hammer meets steel, and from the glow of the furnace, a weapon slowly takes form. This isn't just any weapon, it's a medieval sword. More than a tool for battle, it was a symbol of status, honor, and craftsmanship. But how exactly were these iconic weapons made? Today, we're stepping back in time to explore the process of forging a medieval sword, right from raw iron to a blade worthy of a knight, right here on History of Simple Things. Let's begin with the basics. In medieval Europe, swordsmithing was both an art and a science. Swords weren't mass-produced the way we manufacture things today. Each one was carefully crafted by a skilled blacksmith, usually someone who had been apprenticed for years under a master. Their knowledge was passed down like a secret recipe, learned through practice, patience, and burns earned along the way. Back then, blacksmiths worked primarily with iron and later steel, which is iron combined with carbon. The earliest medieval swords, like those from the early Middle Ages, were often made from wrought iron, a soft metal that didn't hold an edge well. But as forging techniques improved, smiths began using steel, which was much tougher and capable of keeping a sharp edge through battle. Getting the right material was the first step. Medieval blacksmiths didn't have access to the kind of steel we have today. They had to create their own, often by a process called carburization. This meant heating iron in a charcoal-rich environment for many hours, allowing it to absorb carbon and become steel. Once they had the steel, the next step was refining it, removing impurities, folding it, and sometimes layering different types of metal to create a strong yet flexible blade. This wasn't always done for decoration. A well-layered sword could absorb shock better in combat and was less likely to snap under pressure. Now came the real work, shaping the blade. The swordsmith would heat the steel in a forge until it glowed a bright orange or yellow, hot enough to be soft, but not so hot that it lost its structure. With the steel glowing, they began hammering. This stage was physically demanding. Every strike of the hammer had a purpose, either to lengthen the blade, thin out the edges, or align the steel's grain structure. The sword would be reheated many times during this process. And each time, the blacksmith had to carefully judge the temperature just by the color of the metal. The basic shape would start to emerge. A long, tapering blade with a thick spine in the middle. This spine was essential for strength. Medieval swords weren't meant to slice like a katana, they were made to stab, slash, and endure impact. Once the sword was shaped, the next step was heat treatment, a crucial stage that determined the sword's durability. The blade would be heated again, this time to an exact temperature, and then suddenly cooled in water or oil. This process is called quenching, and it hardens the steel. But here's the tricky part. A blade that's too hard becomes brittle. It might hold a sharp edge, but it could also snap like glass in battle. To balance this, smiths used a second step called tempering. The quenched blade would be gently reheated to a lower temperature, just enough to relieve internal stress and bring back a bit of flexibility. Getting this balance just right was part science, part instinct. A seasoned blacksmith could tell how well they'd done just by the sound of the blade or the color during heating. With a hardened and tempered blade in hand, it was time to bring it to life. The surface would be rough after all that hammering and heating, so the sword would be ground down and polished. Using grindstones, whetstones, and sometimes fine abrasives like sand or even charcoal powder, the smith would refine the blade's shape, define the edge, and smooth out imperfections. This stage was slow and delicate. It could take hours or even days. But the result was a blade that was not only functional but beautiful. Some swords were engraved or etched with runes, religious symbols, or the blacksmith's own mark. These weren't just decorations. They told stories about who the sword was made for, what battles it had seen, or what kingdom it served. Of course, a sword isn't just a blade. The hilt, the part you hold, was just as important. It had several components: the guard, the grip, and the pommel. The guard, or crossguard, protected the user's hand. It was forged from iron or steel and often curved slightly. The grip was typically made from wood, wrapped in leather or wire for comfort and control. And the pommel at the end of the hilt served as a counterweight to balance the blade. Pommels came in many shapes: round, faceted, or even shaped like animals or symbols of rank. In battle, they could also be used as blunt weapons, but mostly they gave the sword its perfect balance. With all parts ready, the sword was assembled. The tang, the narrow end of the blade, was slotted into the grip and secured with rivets or pinned over at the pommel. The blacksmith would test the sword's balance, making sure it could be wielded comfortably with one or two hands. Some swords were made for knights in shining armor, while others were crafted for foot soldiers or noblemen. The design varied depending on purpose: long swords for powerful swings, arming swords for one-handed use, great swords for battlefield intimidation. Forging a medieval sword was never just about making a tool. It was a blend of tradition, trial and error, and deep respect for the craft. Blacksmiths weren't just craftsmen, they were creators of legacy. Every sword that survives today is a testament to their skill and the warriors who carried them. Even now, modern bladesmiths still use many of the same techniques: folding steel, quenching in oil, grinding with care. In a way, every handmade sword today still echoes the sound of hammer on anvil from centuries ago. So the next time you see a medieval sword in a museum or in a film, take a moment to appreciate the unseen hours that went into forging that blade. You're not just looking at metal, you're looking at a story hammered into steel. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.